Hello, in this video we're going to set up and configure and use a deployment server to deploy an operating system out to client machines. So first of all, we're going to import a router. So I'll just go to my local drive, templates, there's a zero shell router. And I'm going to call this cert for firewall. And we'll change the name to be the same, cert for firewall.vdi. And change, so it generates a new MAC address for all network cards, so becomes a new machine. Okay, it's going to import hard drives as VDIs. Okay, so let's go import. Okay, that didn't take very long. And we'll run that. Actually, it's probably, before we do that, let's close it. Machine, close, power it off. Okay. What we're going to do before I do any of that, I'm just going to put it in a group. So group it into, rename the group. So just call it cert for deploy. That'll do. Okay. So that can run. This initial stuff is just creating a small network and getting the operating systems in and running. So it's a little bit tedious. You can fast forward this part if you've already got a small network already made. Okay, I for IP manager. We can see that, okay, so my internal network is 3.1, that's on Ether 01. My external network is connected via NAT, which is, usually we would bridge, but that's okay for this particular time. If I do an S for shell prompt, can I ping www.google.com? Yes, I can. It's working. That's because I'm actually at home rather than at work. So if I was in TAFE, this wouldn't work because TAFE wouldn't allow us to ping through the TAFE system. And I should get name resolution though. So back to www.google.com comes back to an IP address of 142.250.66.196. That's this particular time. Exit out of that. Okay, so this thing's okay for the moment. Later on we want to come and turn NAT on the front interface. So what we're going to do now is file import a 2019 server. We'll get this PC. Down to the templates. Get a sysprep 2019 server. We'll change this to C4. I'm just going to call it DC for domain controller because that's what it's going to become. 4 gigabytes of memory is fine. We need to change the name. Let's call this C for DC.vdi. And tick the box to change the MAC address. Search for DC, VDI. Yep, that looks all good. Oops, we put it in the wrong group, the primary group there. Doesn't matter. We can move it into the deploy group once it's finished being deployed. It says here 6 minutes, but in actual fact, I think it's only got to get to about 6 or 7%, and then it's finished. Yep, there we go. We actually want to put this into okay, so if we go HS to shut it down, that way we'll be able to put this actually into the same group. Can you actually go group? Yeah, that would put it into a different group though. I actually want to put it into this group, which now it's in the same group. Okay, so start that. Now our 2019 server, we just need to make sure it can get out to the internet, number one, and we want to promote it to being a domain controller. And then what we will need to do is make sure DHCP is turned on, so it's giving out IP addresses. Another good thing to do is to actually create a reverse lookup zone as well in DNS. So once we've promoted this to being a domain controller, a reverse lookup zone, a DHCP server, and then we'll install Windows deployment services, so WDS. That's all looking okay. Yep. Minimize this out of the road. I've pulled in one of these already pre-prepared virtual machines, the SysPrep 2019. The other important thing that we need on this is to make sure that it's got the guest editions installed. Okay, so the virtual machine needs that. The reason we're going to do that is because at some point later on we're going to go shared folders, and we're going to add in a shared folder which points back to a directory on our host machine that contains all the operating system files that we want to import for our latest version of Windows 10, the 20H2 version. Okay, so having the guest editions installed is necessary in order to do that. Okay, so So while it's doing that, we're going to create a brand new Windows 10 machine. So I call this C for Win 10. That'll do. Windows 10 machine. 2 gig of memory is fine. Hard drive, VDI format, dynamically allocated, 50 gigabytes is quite fine. and it's also in this group as well. So yep, okay. So that's the machine we're going to deploy our operating system to. And then later on, what we'll do is we'll modify it, turn it into what's effectively the corporate reference operating system, and then we'll import it back into the Windows deployment services and then deploy it out to another machine. So we're going to create a second Windows 10 machine afterwards. Okay, so let's see where this is up to. That looks okay. We accept our standard password. Okay, Control-Alt-Delete, our standard password. Hard drive and networking are going. Okay, so this thing will pull up the server manager. That's the first thing that it does. Yes, we found a network. That's good. Some weird guest editions update is available, so it knows that guest editions is installed. There's an easy way to check that. So if we pull up two of them, this PC, go to Drive C, and look at the program files, there should be an Oracle directory with guest editions installed. If you don't have that, you'll need to go to Devices, insert the guest edition CD, and then install it all and do the reboot. So you've got the guest editions. We don't need to see that again. Okay, so we're going to go to the local server. This is just a bare server. It's got an awkward name, so we're going to change that as well. Enhanced security configuration is on, so I'm going to turn all that off. IP4 address is currently set to get one automatically. Turn off quality of service, turn off IP version 6, keep IV version 4, and give it a static IP address, 192.168.3.2, and the gateway is 3.1, 192.168.3.1. That's because, whoops, this thing is 3.1. And the devices we should look at is where these things are connected. NAT and adapter 2 is to the internal network. So we just need to make sure that that our machine's connected to the internal network as well. So preferred DNS server, I'm going to use the one that's out on the internet, 8.8.8.8. That'll do for the moment. Okay. I'm just going to check that the networking is set to an internal network. Nope, see, by default it becomes NAT. Internal network, and we want it to be on internal network. Okay. Cable is unplugged. Now it's identifying. It's found a network. Okay. So, I also want to turn all these Windows Defender firewalls on and off. Domain firewall is currently on. Now it's off. The private firewall is on, now it's off. And the private network, the public network is on. I want to turn that off as well. Okay. So at the moment, I've just turned all firewalls off temporarily. We're still in a work group. So if I hit refresh on this, that thing should go off. Yep, it's off. Okay, what we're going to do is change the computer name. And then once we've done that, we'll promote this thing to being a domain controller. But first of all, what we'll do is we'll check to make sure, we can do that now actually, that NAT is turned on our firewall. So don't use recommended settings. Let's go to the IP address of the router, 192.168.3.1. Okay, got there eventually. Go to the web page, admin, and the password is 0shell. We're going to remember it. We're going to go to router and then to NAT. And we're going to put ether00 as a NAT enabled interface and hit save. So now this thing's a NAT router, which means that I should be able to get out to the internet. There's another tab here. So if I go to www.google, helps if you say Google instead of, can't spell, Google. Okay, there's Google. Images, go Fox. I get pictures of foxes, there we go. So it's all working. It's out to the internet, close all tabs. Okay, so now the only thing we need to do is change the name here, let it reboot, and then we'll promote it to being a domain controller. So let's go change, let's call this thing DC for domain controller. Yep, close, restart now. It's a little bit of mucking around just setting all this up, but once it's done, it's not too bad. You get that screen tearing because of the graphic driver that's in VirtualBox. I often revert back to the Microsoft one because that way I've got the facility to do all the other features, but the graphics is not so terrible. The VirtualBox graphics driver is actually worse than the inbuilt Microsoft Basic driver, which is quite interesting. Regular password. Now the other thing that we probably need to do here is we're going to need a separate drive to put our Windows deployment stuff on. So currently we've got, I think it's a 150 gig drive. So if I right mouse click and go to disk management, yeah, got a 150 gigabyte drive here with 130 gigabytes of space free. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to carve off 50 gigabytes of it. So I'm going to shrink the volume. Amount to shrink in megabytes. Amount of space to shrink in megabytes. So I'm just going to make that 50,000. There we go. Shrink. And this space here, new simple volume, run the wizard. I'm going to give a can't use D because D's for the CD-ROM. W for WDS, how's that? So WDS data. Perform a quit format, that's okay. Finish. Okay, so now we've got 2 drives. It's either that or actually add another drive to the machine. This is faster. Plenty of space. Okay, so we come back with DC. So what we need to do now is to turn this thing into a domain controller. Okay, so we can go to manage and add roles and features, or back at the dashboard we could do the same thing, add roles and features. Skip the page by default. Next, next, next. It's doing it to this machine. What we need to do is install Active Directory domain services, so tick that box. Tick to add all the associated features, and go next, next, next install. This is just a matter of waiting for this thing to get across. So I'm just going to pause until it's finished. Okay, so we've just installation has succeeded. So we can close that, and on the notifications it's got a link here to tell us to promote it to being a domain controller, which is what we need. This is going to be a new forest. The root name, I'm just going to call it bmw.local. Just base it on your initials. Next. Forest functional level, this is server 2019, but the forest functional level and the lowest domain controller operating system that it will accept is a 2016 version. It's going to create a DNS. It will be a global catalog because it's the first domain controller in the forest, and we're going to put the regular password in. I'll hit next. Hit next. It comes up with a warning that says can't find a DNS server. That's okay because this is going to become a DNS server. It gets the NetBIOS name, which is just the prefix of your domain name, which in my case is BMW. There it is. Next. Okay, I don't mess with the databases. These are the default locations, so hit next. That's a summary of everything. We're just going to go next. It'll now do a prerequisites check, and it'll tell us there's 2 warnings, but everything's actually okay. We'll get a green tick. So green tick, 2 warnings, completed, green tick, everything's all okay. So we're going to go install. So now you can see it's waiting for the DNS installation to finish. Now it's checking if Group Policy Console needs to be installed, which it will. Configuring to host the Active Directory, it creates the directory partitions. It's whizzing through the objects. Okay, setting up the local security policy, securing the machine. Okay, so now it's finished and it does a reboot. It's going to restart. Yep. This is the first boot up after becoming a domain controller, so it's a little bit slower, to be expected. Okay, so let's delete. You can see now it's logging into the domain. We've got BMW/administrator. Using the regular password. Okay. So if we click on local server, we can see that our computer name is DC and we're in the domain bmw.local. 3.2 is our IP address. Okay, so it'll finish filling this out in a minute. So we'll have DNS in here as well. We've still got it still doing stuff across the top here. Still sorting out the dashboard. So we can go and have a look at DNS anyway. Okay, so if we double click on DNS, expanded out, forward lookup zone, bmw.local, that's what it is. Okay. What we would like to be able to do is right mouse click on this and launch NS lookup, and you can currently see the default server is unknown. What this really should show is that it's DC bmw.local, and that's because we don't have a reverse lookup for NS. So I'm going to go new zone. Next, it's going to be a primary zone. Tool in. Yeah, it doesn't matter. That one will do. It's an IP4 reverse lookup zone. The network ID is 192.168.3. And identify the reverse lookup zone. Okay. If you use a 0, the network ID appears in the name range. Okay. So go next. Only allow secure dynamic updates. That'll do. Okay. And so what we need to do is put a pointer in here. So can we put a new pointer in here? Okay. So it does know that the name server is us. Okay, so let's just have a check by using our NS lookup. Still comes up server unknown. Okay, so that means we just need to put a pointer in here. Hostname.2, and the host name is going to be, if we look that up, DC forward lookup zone BMW, point to DC as the 3.2. Okay, so now we've got a pointer in there. Okay, so let's check our launch NS lookup, and you can see now that it's picking up that it's DC BMW.local. So that means we've got forward and reverse lookups that point back to our server, which is good. Okay, so that's what I wanted to do in DNS. And you can see DNS is here in Active Directory and file services and all that sort of stuff. Next thing we need is DHCP. And tools, there's no DHCP here. So we're going to go to Manage, Add Roles and Features. And it's a new role on this server. And we want it to be a DHCP server. Go Add Features. Next. Next, install. Next, install. It's a matter of waiting for it to finish installing. Okay, so configuration has succeeded. Oh, sorry, installation has succeeded. So we close that and we go to the notifications. We're going to complete the DHCP configuration, which is going to authorize it so that it works properly in a domain. So we're just going to use the current credentials. So it's done, we close it. So now what we do is actually set up a scope. What I'm going to do is get rid of those two notifications, go to Tools, down to DHCP. And here under IP version 4, what I want to do is right mouse click and create a new scope. Here's the scope wizard. The name of it's just going to be IPs, whatever you want to call it. Starting address is 192.168.3.100, say, to 200. Okay, so that's, we're not any exclusions in, so we'll go next. We'll lease it out for 8 days is fine. We do want to configure options. So the default gateway for the clients is going to be 192.168.3.1, which is the router, this firewall, sorry. Okay, so we go next. The server name is just going to be DC. If I resolve it, that's us. It's already added onto the list, so I don't need to re-add it. And I'll go next. We're not wiring with a Win server. Next. And we do want to activate the scope now, so it runs. Okay, we've got little green ticks, which is good. And later on, when we start up our Windows 10 machine, it's going to get an IP address, and we're going to see that's the pool of addresses from 3.100 to 3.200, and we'll see a lease here for an IP address for the Windows 10 machine at that point. Okay, so we've got DHCP up and running. We've got scope options in here, router, DNS server, and domain name. Now there are ways that we can point all client machines to a specific share and boot image using options 66 and 67. So if I can configure options in here, if we roll down, we can go the boot server host name for TFTP and the boot file name 66 and 67. Now, that's one way. If we're looking at like a zero touch type environment where we just boot the machine and let it automatically boot up and get boot up off the network and download and install an operating system, we could use this sort of scheme. However, that's a little bit limiting because it forces every client to use this boot file name. Anyone that gets a DHCP address, that is. So I leave it and we let them sort it out themselves, so to speak. Okay, so we've done DHCP. Okay, so what we need to do now is install WDS. Add roles and features. Again, we're going to go down the bottom here and install Windows Deployment Services. There we go, tick. Add all the features and go next. Next, next. We want both of these things, deployment and transport server, so we go next. And then we hit install. Okay, so the installation has succeeded. We can click close on that. There is notification, but nothing in particular. Okay, so we can see the WDS is on the side here. If we click on Tools, we can go down to Windows Deployment Services. Here it is. Okay, so this is the console that we're looking for. If we expand out the servers, it says that it's not configured. To configure this server, right-click the server and then click Configure Server. Okay, adding some new features to Windows. I don't know what that's for. Anyway, Configure Server. We're going to go next. So it says here that it must be a member of the Active Directory domain services, active DHCP server on the network, because that handles the pre-execution environment. Active DNS on your network. This server has NTFS file system on a partition in which to store images. So we've done all of that. So we can go next. Integrated with Active Directory. So we're doing that because this is on a domain controller. So we're going to go next. So instead of the remote installation folder being on drive C, we actually want it to be on drive W, if I remember correctly. PC, we went drive W for WDS data. Remember, we carved off part of it and called it drive W. So let's kill that. Sorry, that. And change that to a W. And go next. Check. So if DHCP is running on this server, check both of the following checkboxes to use DHCP tools to add for that. Okay, so we've got both boxes ticked. So we're going to go next. We're going to respond to all clients, known and unknown. We could tick the box here to require administrator approval for any unknown computers, but for the sake of what we're doing at the moment, demonstration, well, I'm not going to require that, so we're going to go next. So that sets this computer up, this domain controller, as a Windows deployment server. And often you find, you can see here that it's not started. So normally you have to go right mouse, click all tasks, and then start it up. Well, it was a black dot, we want a green play button, or black stop. It started, we can see the green play button. So now we can install images and boot images and all that sort of stuff. Now you'll see that there's none of those in here. So now what we need to do is to load these things up and make them available for client machines. Now to do that, normally just go right mouse click, add a boot image, right mouse click, add an install image. This is where the particular version of Windows 10 we're using is a little bit different from earlier versions. And I'm just going to minimize this and show you on the host machine what I mean and set it up in the correct folder. So I'm going to the host machine, opening up I'm going to delete those. I can continue because we're going to redo those ourselves. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go to, I've got a couple of, that's a 1 terabyte solid state. I'm going to have a look at Windows 10 in here. And I've got old versions. Okay, so let's go to my external one and go to Windows 10 here. Okay, so there's a 20H2 April version. Okay, and I think that one's that's the 21st of April. This is the 29th of April. So this is the very latest one. So I'm going to copy that and put it back onto that internal drive, because the internal drive will go faster. So let's go current ISOs, Windows 10, and put it there, paste. Okay, so what I want to do is open this. I'm going to create a folder, new folder, and call it Windows 10 Pro X64 20H2. Okay, so that's the folder that I'm going to extract everything out of here into. So I'm going to open that with 7-zip, and there's the entire file structure, and I want to extract that to that folder. So that's where we're going to put it, to that folder. So let's go extract. Okay, so let's have a quick look. Yep, looks like it's all there. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of the zip, and the things that we're looking for in our deployment services is the boot image and the install image. Okay, and they're normally kept in the sources folder, and so we're looking for everything that's a type WIM. Sorry if I just keep it to the actual name. So we've got boot WIM, number 1. Where did that go? There's boot WIM. Okay, so So that's a Windows installation type file. So that's the boot WIM that we need to go into the boot images here in our Windows deployment server. Now there's also an install image. So if I go to install image, what you see is it's install.esd. Now ESD is a compressed file that can't be used there. We need to convert it back to being a WIM file. It's only in the last few generations of Windows that they've actually put their install, it used to be install WIM, but now they've compressed it, I suppose, to make it fit on the DVD size, because it does do a bit of compression. So this thing here might come out to be like 4.5 gigabytes or something like that. So what we want to do is we actually want to get the correct version of Windows 10, extract it out of this ESD file and put it back in here as a WIM file. So I'm going to cut this and I'm going to put it to our drive C, right into the root directory there, paste. Yep. Okay, so I've put it there. Now there's two ways we can extract this, because what I'm going to do is once I've extracted it to the install.wim, I'll then put the WIM file back up into that directory that I just copied this out of. There's two ways. There's a command line way, and then there's a program you can download and install which does it all graphically. So I've got that written in a file that I'll give everyone a copy of. How to get the install WIM from the install ESD on the host computer, copy the ISO. Okay. We can either use the ENT Lite program or we can use the command line. So I'm going to use this info there. So we'll go Control C to copy that. And back in my, sorry, it's on my host machine. Back on my host machine, what I want to do is I want to right mouse click. Actually, I want to run this as an administrator just to make sure. So let's just go. I am an administrator anyway. Change directory back to the root directory. And if I do a dir, you'll see the install.esd files there. If I right mouse click and put that dism get wim info win installation, it's the install ESD file. So if I click on that, okay, I needed the elevated permissions. So okay, so right mouse click, run. Actually, I can just go CMD here, CMD, and run as administrator. Yep. Okay, so change directory back to the root directory. And I'll just change the properties and change the font so it's up a bit higher, so everybody can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to do the right mouse click to do the same thing. And it shows me the indexing of the different versions of Windows that are inside this install ESD. Okay, so I can see index 1 points to the Windows 10 Home, that's inside here. Index 2 points to the Windows 10 Home N. The version that we're after is actually the Windows 10 Pro, which is index 6. So we need to remember that, because what we're going to do is we're going to extract using this index to an install WIM. Now back to here, what we're going to do is use the same DISM program, and we're going to go down to integrity check. So we're going to go Control C, back to here. I'm going to do a right mouse click. So I'm going to export the image. The source file is install ESD. Index is going to be number 6, which is the Windows 10 Pro. Destination image file is install.wim. We're going to compress it max and check its integrity. So let's hit enter. So now it's exporting the image. This can take a little while. Yep, it's only at 3% now. Okay, so I'll just pause until this is finished. So it's nearly finished. So I imagine now it's exported, it's doing the compression and the checking the integrity. Doesn't show you anything though. Okay, completed successfully. So dir, oops, helps if you're back in here. dir. So you can see that we've now got an install WIM that's been extracted out of the install ESD, and it's an extra 0.5 gigabyte more, roughly. Okay, so what we want to do is, back on here, we want to copy this file back to the folder where we moved the ESD from. So back to our 850 Evo, current ISOs, Windows 10, and it was the H2 file and in the sources folder. So we paste that back in there. Okay, so now we don't have the install.esd file now, we've just got the install.wim. So this is now just the Windows 10 Pro version only. Okay, so we've got all of the files we need for a full installation back in the format, the WIM format that's useful, and it's all in this folder here. So what I want to do is I want to share this folder to our server. Okay, so let me out of that, let's go back to our thing here. So what we want to do is go to devices on the server, down to the shared folders, and go shared folder settings. Now this only works once you've got the VirtualBox guest editions installed. Okay, so we're going to hit plus on here, and we're going to find the folder path. We're going to click on other, and we're going to go down to the correct folder, which is too far, current ISOs. We want to go to Windows 10, expand that out. We want to pick this H2 folder. That's got all of our files in it. So we want to select that folder. We want to root it, and we want to auto mount it, and click OK. So we're going to go OK on this, and it's going to mount this folder as another drive letter probably Z, drive Z I imagine, in our virtual machine here. So I'm going to click on here, go to this PC, and you can see that we've got a network location, drive Z, which is this shared folder. Okay, and if we click on that, what we're looking at is the folder that's actually on the host machine that I just shared to it. So this is quite a nifty little trick that is very, very useful for situations like this. Normally we've got an ISO image, but the ISO contained the install.esd file. We could have mounted that into this virtual machine, but we can't use the ESD file. So the thing to do is to extract all the files out, put it in a folder, extract out the install WIM file, which is, we can see it's install WIM file. That's the install WIM file there. Yeah, and put it back into the folder and then just share the folder to the machine. Yeah, we could have converted back to being an ISO and then mounting that, but it's a little bit too much trouble. So this is the easy way to do it. Okay, so that's drive Z is the shared folder. So what we're going to do here is now we're going to install everything that we need into the boot images and the install images. I'm going to go right mouse click on boot images. I'm going to add a boot image. I'm going to browse to a location and I'm going to go to this PC. I'm going to go to drive Z and I'm going to go to sources and I'm going to pick the boot WIM and go OK. So you can see how it gets there. We can call it any name or description that we want. So this is going to be a image name. I'm just going to call this Windows 10 Pro X64 setup. Put that in there as well. Control V. 10 Pro X64. Next. Okay, so that's our boot image. We're going to go next. So it adds that boot image into the folder here, so it copies it up. Quite slowly by the looks of it. Oh no, here it goes. Okay. Just took a little while to get started. Images successfully added, so we're going to go finish. And now we want the install image. We're going to add, I'm going to add an image group. It doesn't really matter. I mean, we can have an image group or install an image and then it'll ask us to put it in a group anyway. So it's going to ask us for an image group. I'm just going to call this, you know, client operating system or something like that. Next, pick the, so we're going to go browse, we're going to go to drive Z and pick the install WIM. Go next, and next. So you can see it's picking up the Windows 10 Pro version. Like in the earlier versions of Windows 10, their WIM file actually had, they didn't have an ESD file, they had a WIM file with all the different versions, you know how we had multiple indexes. That would all be in the WIM file, but now they compress it into an ESD file, so it causes a bit of a problem. Use the default name and description of each of the selected items. So we're going to go next. Windows 10 Pro is the selected image. And so this is going to import the install.wim file. I think this takes a little while to get started, and then the folder that is sitting on a solid state drive, so it should import reasonably okay. I think it's 4.5 gigabytes, so yeah, it's going not too bad. Okay, so we've now added that image into the client OS group. We can see it's there, called Windows 10 Pro. It's 15 gigabytes, roughly, expanded size. And we've got a boot image here as well, which is the one we told it to be, 10proX64, you know, that one setup, whatever. Okay, and it's just under 2 gigabytes. Is there anything I need to do here? Properties, all tasks, no, it's all running. Let's look at the properties. No, that all looks okay. So boot images, that's just to add more. Later on, we're going to create a capture image as well, but we're not up to that. So that'll be the next video. And on our installed images, client OS, place image, create a multicast transmission, as if we're doing to multiple machines at once. Okay, so everything looks like it's okay. If we look at the properties, yep, it's all okay. So if I did look at the properties of that, there's a allow image to install in unattended mode. I'd tick that box and select the unattended text file, and we could create a basically an answer file for everything, and then it would use that during the install, the answer file, and create a minimal touch. Not exactly a zero touch, but close to a zero touch. But that's that sort of fine tuning's for another video. Okay, so let's leave that where it is. Okay, so at the moment, we've put in a boot image, we've put in an install image. All we need to do now is boot this thing up, get an IP address from the DHCP server, boot up off that image, and then pull in the actual install, and that will do it. Okay, so I'm going to look at our Windows 10 machine. Let's just verify that everything is set up correctly before we power it on. System. Okay, so here our Windows 10 machine. It's got a floppy disk first. I'm going to untick that, and I'm going to move it down the list, and I'm going to tick on the network, and I'm going to push it up the list, and optical can go down the list. Okay, so that's the boot order. We're going to boot from a network. That's not enabled by default, so you know that we need to do that. Processor, I'm going to give it at least 2 processors. I've got 16 available. I can use half of them, but depends on your machine. Give it 2 anyway. Display maximum storage is currently only 2 megabytes because there's nothing installed. Okay. The network is by default attached to NAT. We need to make sure that it's internal network connected to the internal network. the same as our Windows, our server, because that's got the DHCP server, and so it needs to get an IP address from the DHCP server. Everything else is all okay. Let's just check that our server is attached to internal server. It is, and our Windows 10 machine is also attached to the same server. Okay, so let's start this up. Okay, cancel that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to click in here and hit it's trying to boot, get an IP address. When it does, it's going to ask to press the F12 key to boot from the server. So we're going to do that. When it gets an IP address, you should get a 192.168.3.100, my guess. That was the DHCP range we put on in the scope. F12. So now we're telling it to boot. It did get an IP address of 3.100. So it's loading that boot WIM. So you can basically do this to any client machine that boots up off its network card. You can press F12. It'll go against the WDS server that's on our machine over here, and it'll boot up off that boot WIM. And we could have multiple operating systems install WIMs there, and we could install a different range of them. Okay, so patience is the key here. It is booting and installing across a virtual network in this case. Local, okay, I don't think we need to change that. English, okay, I suppose we'll go English Australia. There's English Australia. Go next. You'll see it's Windows Deployment Services. It's asking for us to put in the domain administrator account, and it's got two different formats. So it's domain/user or user@domain.com. So I'm just going to go administrator at bmw.local. Okay, administrator at bmw.local, and the password is my regular password. And hit OK. You can, when we're looking at the automation, you can actually put all this in a text file, and it will come in automatically, unattended.txt file. So the only one we've got is our Windows 10 Pro, which is the one that we extracted from the install.esd index number 6. We extracted that to a WIM, copied that back up, and then installed it. And so that's the only one we've got. I'm going to go next. That's the allocated space. Just go next. It's very similar to doing a standard install, because I haven't tried to automate this at all. So, I mean, that's the subject of another video. So at the moment, I'm going to pause this while it goes through the standard installation from a network. So while this is continuing to do its install, I'd just like to go back and show how to extract the correct install WIM out of the install ESD program on our, I think I put it on drive C. So if I look at drive C, that's the ESD program, and that was the WIM file that I copied up to. So I can actually get rid of that now, but I'm going to show you how easy it is to make it with another program called NT Lite. So if you go out to the internet and look up NT Lite, hit the download for that. Download the 64-bit version, and you can see I've already got it once, so actually put it in the utilities. I must have, yeah, I've got the beta version and the other version anyway, so yeah, you'd save it there. Then you just double click and install it. So in my case, I should already have that here. Here's NT Lite. So I'm going to run it. Can minimize that out of the road now. So here's NT Lite. That's the program. And what I'm going to do is find the source. I'm going to add an image file, and I'm going to go find it on drive C. There's the ESD file. Selected is an isolated image, thus ISO functionality is disabled, so it can't find the entire rest of the CD image, and so it can't convert it back to an ISO image, which we don't care about. Okay, so and you can see here in the ESD program we've actually got all the other versions, and remember it was our index 6 that we were creating, and that was roughly the 15 gigabytes. So you know, this is the way to do it if you don't want to do command line. You just do this, and then really is all I need to do is right mouse click on that and export it to a WIM file. And I'm going to put it back in the same place, or I can put it in a different directory, up to you. And it'll just whiz across there and create our install.wim file out of this ESD file. And we can pick as many different versions as we want. You know, if we want to install a, you know, an education version or a home version, we could. It's okay. Okay, so looking back at drive C, you'll see that the WIM file started. If I hit the refresh button, you'll see the size changes as it extracts more. Our Windows 10 machine is still continuing at its install. So here's our NT Lite program extracting the Windows 10 Pro part out of the ESD, and we're putting it into a WIM file. And you can see I made multiple files before. I made an install2.wim at some other point in time. Like I said, you can extract as many of those as you want, and then load them all up into your WDS, and then you can install any of these. That's okay. So back to Yeah, if I do a refresh, file size hasn't gone up. It'll probably it's probably going to a temporary file at the moment, temporary directory, and then when it's finished, the Wim file will be, yeah, you can see it's increasing in size as more stuff gets added to it. Okay. Yep. Okay. So I just wanted to show people, instead of doing command line, you can just do it using a GUI, and it's quite useful. Okay. Okay, just made a matter of waiting for this installation to finish, and it's nearly there. It's no different really from installing off any other media. One thing we do have later on in one of the following videos is the ability to create an answer file and streamline a lot of this so that it becomes almost a zero touch. We've still always, at the moment, we've still always got the press the F12 as part of the boot process to kick it off. But after that point, you can make it essentially zero touch. Okay, so let's restart now. So here we don't hit the F12, we just let it. Actually, you can hit the escape key in here, and it will stop trying to get an IP address. So just hit escape. It cancels the network booting. It'll still get an IP address once the operating system loads, of course. This being like any other normal boot, you've got to answer all of the standard questions. It takes a while to actually set up. That's Windows for you. I don't know why it's showing. Do not show this in the. Let's go OK. While our Windows 10 here is still getting itself ready, let's go back and have a look at our NT Lite. Looks like it's finished. So if I go back to here, you'll see that the install Wim is the expanded version, which if we have a look at the one that we copied across to to here looks about the same sort of size. So if I go current ISOs, and I think it was Windows 10 and that one. So if I open that in a new window and look at the sources and go to the install Wim, you can see that that's the one that we did before at 423, and it's 598 922. The one we've just done at 553 is 598 922. Exactly the same size, but we did extract those two different ways, one with this NT Lite and the other one via the command line. So doing that process of getting WIM files out of ESD files, you can do it either way. Okay, so our Windows 10 is a big black nothing. Okay, so it's just done a restart. Again, we're not going to hit the F12 key here, but we're going to hit the escape key to stop it from booting from the network. And at this point we should be now continuing the setup, the final part. Yeah, we've got just a moment. Hang on there while we set things up, all that sort of stuff. Okay, we're going to pick, can we pick Australia? Pick Australia, go next. We're doing the basics. Keyboard, that's correct. We don't want to put any more keyboards in. Okay, so we will accept the license agreement. We're going to set up for an organisation. We're going to use a domain join. Yoda will do. Usual password. Confirm it. Question 1. It's 1. 2. 3. Okay, we turn all these things off. Turn off Cortana. Yeah, it's hi, hello, we're setting things up, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so it's found a network. Searching for a display driver. Okay, maybe later on that. Okay, we want to just see whether CMD. Okay. Command prompt, IP config/all. And we've got a 3.100 IP address. 3.1's the gateway, 3.2's the DHCP server, and the DNS server is also 3.2. What that means is we need to tell our DNS server how to get out to the internet. If I go ping www.google.com, yeah, it does get there. That's good. Okay, so what's happened is when we set up DNS on our server, not that I actually checked this, but it's easy to show right now, is that originally I had as the DNS client on the network card was 8.8.8.8. Whoops, wrong password. And so when we created a DNS server, let's kill that. When we have a look at our DNS server, it's automatically put, if I right mouse click on this and go to properties, it's automatically put a forwarder in to what I had on as a DNS on the card. So it's put a DNS out, it's Google's DNS server is 8.8.8.8. So I had that on the card originally, and when I promoted this to being a domain controller installing DNS, it's automatically put the forwarder out to the DNS that I had on the card to start with, which is why with our DHCP giving out DNS as this machine here, 3.2, our client machine Windows 10, when it goes to 3.2, DNS in here doesn't know about Google, but it forwards out to the next DNS server. So that's why I was able to find it and get out to the internet. So there's no reason why this thing won't get out to the internet. Let's just go. Not that I like using Microsoft Edge. Go away. Can I just get to the internet? Let's go www.google.com. Images. This is a brand new install, but if I type Fox, Fox, it should find foxes. Well, it does. Lots of foxes, apparently. Okay, and iSetter, just to make sure. Yep, gets to iSetters as well. Okay, so there it is. We've deployed Windows 10, the latest version, 20H2, via WDS out to a bare machine, and which PXE booted or Pixie boot network booted, and we install the operating system. So it works quite fine. Okay, so that's the end of this video. The next video, what we're going to do is we're going to well, number one, we're going to modify our Windows 10 and turn it into our corporate standard operating environment, so to speak. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sysprep it and cast it back to our WDS server as a captured image. So we're going to capture this operating system, this corporate edition of the operating system, our standard SOE, back to the WDS server and then deploy it back out to another machine. And then, once we can deploy it out to one machine, we can deploy it out to every machine. And, we've got a standard operating environment that we just deploy out to everyone. Okay, so that's the subject of the next video, and I'll see you all then.